At 6:15 a.m. on June 14, 1944, Sergeant Eugene "Mac" Makiewicz stood in the turret hatch of his M5A1 Stuart light tank, watching the Norman hedgerows turn gold in the early morning light. 24 years old, 3 weeks in France, 0 confirmed tank kills. The Stuart was a joke. Everyone in the Armored Corps knew it. Officially designated a light tank, the M5A1 weighed 15 tons. Barely half the weight of a German Panzer IV. It mounted a 37mm M6 cannon that had been designed in 1938 to fight tanks that no longer existed. Against the light tanks of the Spanish Civil War, the 37mm had been adequate. Against the medium tanks of 1944, it was a pea shooter. At 500 yards, point-blank range in tank combat, the 37mm couldn't penetrate the frontal armor of a Panzer IV at any angle. At 1,000 yards, it couldn't penetrate the side armor. The only way to kill a German tank with a Stuart was to get behind it and shoot it in the rear. And if you were behind a German tank, the German tank was facing your friends. The armor was even worse. The Stuart's frontal plate was 51mm thick, respectable by 1941 standards, pathetic by 1944. The side armor was 29mm. The rear was 25mm. A German 75mm tank gun could punch through any of them at 2,000 yards. An 88mm could do it from a mile and a half away. Even the German 50mm anti-tank guns, weapons that were being phased out as obsolete, could destroy a Stuart from any angle at any normal combat range. The crews called it the Honey because it was sweet to drive. Fast, nimble, reliable. The twin Cadillac engines purred like kittens and could push the little tank to 36 miles per hour on a good road. The steering was responsive. The transmission rarely broke. The tracks were easy to maintain if you wanted a vehicle to race around the countryside, delivering messages and scouting enemy positions. The Stuart was perfect. But sweetness didn't count for much when you were facing a Panzer IV with a 75mm cannon that could turn your tank into a crematorium from a mile away. The Germans had a different nickname for the Stuart. They called it the Tommy Cooker because American tankers burned so well inside them. The Stuart's gasoline engines would ignite when penetrated, and the thin armor meant penetration was almost certain in any serious engagement. German tankers considered killing a Stuart barely worth mentioning. It was like a professional boxer boasting about knocking out a child. The American tankers knew this. They'd been told the statistics in training. They'd seen the after-action reports. They'd watched their friends die in the tanks that everyone assured them were adequate for reconnaissance duties. Mac had seen the reports from North Africa, where Stuarts had been slaughtered by Rommel's panzers in the open desert. He'd read the accounts from Sicily, where Stuart crews had resorted to ramming German tanks because their guns couldn't hurt them any other way. He'd studied every engagement he could find, looking for some secret, some trick, some way to make the Stuart into a weapon instead of a coffin. He hadn't found one, but he was still looking. Mac's tank, which his crew had christened Lucky Lou after his kid sister back in Chicago, was attached to the 71st Tank Battalion, supporting the 4th Infantry Division's push inland from Utah Beach. The battalion had landed with 32 Stuarts. After 3 weeks of fighting through the bocage, the dense hedgerow country that turned every field into a fortress and every road into a kill zone, they were down to 19, 13 tanks gone, 52 men dead or wounded, and they hadn't killed a single German tank in return. The Stuarts weren't supposed to fight tanks. That was the official doctrine. They were reconnaissance vehicles, meant to scout ahead of the main force, find the enemy, and report back. Let the Shermans do the killing. Let the tank destroyers handle the panzers. The Stuarts were just supposed to look and run. But doctrine didn't account for the bocage. In this country, you couldn't see more than 50 yards in any direction. Every hedgerow hid a machine gun nest. Every sunken road concealed an anti-tank gun. And sometimes, when you came around a blind corner, you found yourself face to face with a German tank that wasn't supposed to be there. When that happened, looking and running didn't help. You just died. Mac had watched it happen twice already. He'd seen Sergeant Kowalski's tank take a round through the driver's hatch and explode like a Roman candle. He'd seen Lieutenant Patterson's crew bail out of their burning Stuart and get cut down by machine gun fire before they could reach the ditch. 13 tanks, 52 men, 0 kills. And now, on the morning of June 14th, the battalion commander had called Mac's platoon forward for a special mission. If you're new to WW2 Tales, welcome. This channel covers the incredible true stories of ordinary men who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances during the Second World War. We upload every week, so subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. And stick around to the end of this video, because what Sergeant Makiewicz did over the next 4 hours would turn the Stuarts' reputation upside down. Captain Frank Holloway was waiting at the battalion command post, a farmhouse with half its roof missing and a Sherman tank parked in the barn. Holloway was a West Pointer, regular Army, the kind of officer who treated doctrine like scripture and deviation like heresy. He'd been skeptical of the Stuarts from the beginning, and 3 weeks of losses had only hardened his opinion. "Makiewicz," he said, spreading a map across the hood of his Jeep, "we've got a problem." The map showed a network of roads converging on a small village called Saint-Côme-du-Mont. The village sat at a crossroads that controlled access to the main highway running south toward Carentan. If the Americans could take and hold that crossroads, they could cut off the German forces defending the coast. If the Germans held it, they could use it to launch a counterattack that might push the entire invasion back into the sea. Intelligence says the Germans are moving a Panzer column down this road. Holloway traced a line with his finger. 12 tanks, maybe 15. Panzer IVs mostly, a few assault guns. They're going to hit the crossroads at Saint-Côme sometime in the next 6 hours. Mac studied the map. The road the Germans were using ran through a narrow valley between 2 ridges. It was the only route wide enough for tanks. The rest of the area was hedgerows, orchards, and flooded fields that would bog down anything heavier than a motorcycle. "What do you want us to do, sir?" "I want you to stop them." Mac looked up. "Stop them?" "Captain, with respect, we're Stuarts. We can't even scratch a Panzer IV." "I know what you are, Sergeant, but the Shermans are committed to the main assault. The tank destroyers are still stuck in traffic behind the beach. You're all I've got." "Sir, that's a suicide mission." Holloway's jaw tightened. "I'm aware of that, Sergeant. But if those panzers reach the crossroads, they'll roll right through our infantry. We'll lose the village, we'll lose the highway, and we might lose the whole damn beachhead." He folded the map and handed it to Mac. "I'm not ordering you to win, Sergeant. I'm ordering you to buy time. Slow them down. Make them deploy. Give our boys a chance to dig in. If you can hold them for 2 hours, the tank destroyers will be in position to take over." 2 hours! Against a column of Panzer IVs, with 4 Stuart light tanks. Mac looked at the map, then at Holloway, then at the 3 tanks waiting behind him, Corporal Danny Webb's Daredevil, Corporal Pete Simmons's Pale Rider, and Sergeant Bill Jankowski's Jersey Devil. 15 tons against 30 tons, 37 millimeters against 75 millimeters, tissue paper against steel. "We'll do what we can, sir." Mac walked back to his tank, where his crew was waiting. There were 4 of them, the standard complement for a Stuart: commander, driver, bow gunner, and turret gunner loader. Private First Class Tony Rossetti was the driver, a skinny kid from Pittsburgh who'd worked in his uncle's garage before the war and could make the Stuart do things the designers never intended. He'd grown up racing jalopies on dirt tracks, and he drove the tank the same way, foot to the floor, hands dancing on the tillers, always looking for the edge between control and disaster. Private Ray Washington was the bow gunner, one of the few black tankers in the 75th Battalion, assigned to the position because someone at headquarters had decided that black soldiers could handle a machine gun, but not a tank cannon. Washington had proved them wrong a dozen times over. He was the calmest man in the crew, never rattled, never shaken, always ready with a burst of .30 caliber fire when the infantry got too close. Corporal James Jimmy Chen was the turret gunner and loader, a Chinese-American from San Francisco whose family had been running a laundry in Chinatown since the gold rush. Jimmy could put 5 rounds through a 6-inch circle at 500 yards, and he could load faster than any man Mac had ever seen. The 37mm might be too weak to hurt a Panzer, but at least Jimmy would make sure every shot hit something. And then there was Mac himself, commander, gunner when Jimmy was loading, navigator, radio operator, and, when things went wrong, the man who decided whether they lived or died. 4 men, 15 tons of steel, 1 37mm cannon that couldn't scratch a Panzer, against 12 German tanks with guns that could kill them from a mile away. Mack gathered his 3 tank commanders around the map. Webb, Simmons, and Jankowski. They were all young, they were all scared, and they were all pretending they weren't. "Here's the situation," Mack said. "We've got a Panzer column coming down this road. At least 12 tanks, probably more. They're going to hit the crossroads at Saint-Côme in about 6 hours. Our job is to stop them." "Stop them?" Jankowski laughed. "With what?" "With these." Mack gestured at the 4 Stuarts parked behind him. "I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking it too. But we don't have a choice. If those Panzers reach the crossroads, they'll roll right through our infantry. We lose the village, we lose the highway, we might lose the whole beachhead." "So we die to buy time," Webb said flatly. "That's what the captain expects, but that's not what I'm planning." Mack spread the map on the hood of his tank. "Look at this road. It's the only route wide enough for tanks. Everything else is hedgerows, orchards, and flooded fields. The Panzers have to come through here. They don't have a choice." So we don't fight them in the open. We don't try to slug it out. We use the terrain. We hit them where they're not expecting, and we run before they can hit back." "The 37 can't penetrate their armor," Simmons pointed out. "Not from the front, not from most angles, but the engine deck is only 30 millimeters. The side armor over the ammunition racks is 40 millimeters, and we've got tungsten core AP rounds that can punch through 50 at close range. The tracks, the vision blocks, the external equipment, none of that is armored at all. You're talking about immobilizing them, not killing them. A tank that can't move is a tank that can't fight, and a tank that can't see is just as useless. We don't have to destroy them. We just have to stop them from reaching the crossroads." Mack tapped the map. "There are 5 good ambush positions between here and Saint-Côme. 5 places where the road narrows, or curves, or passes through ground we can use for cover. We're going to hit them at every single one. We're going to make them think there's a whole battalion waiting for them behind every hedgerow. We're going to make them slow down, deploy, waste time. And when they figure out it's just 4 Stuarts, by then, the tank destroyers will be in position, and it won't matter what they figure out." The Stuart had exactly 3 advantages over a Panzer IV. The first was speed. The M5A1 could do 36 miles per hour on a good road, nearly twice the top speed of a Panzer IV. In open country, a Stuart could run circles around a German tank, darting in and out before the gunner could track. The second was low profile. The Stuart stood barely 8 feet tall, compared to nearly 10 feet for a Panzer IV. In the right terrain, a Stuart could hide behind a hedgerow that a Panzer couldn't see over. The third was its gun's rate of fire. The 37mm cannon was too weak to penetrate a Panzer's frontal armor, but it could spit out 20 rounds per minute, 4 times faster than the German 75mm. At close range, against the thinner side and rear armor, those little shells might just punch through. Mack had thought about this a lot over the past 3 weeks. He'd studied the after-action reports, talked to the tankers who'd survived, tried to figure out if there was any way a Stuart could actually kill a Panzer instead of just dying to one. The answer he'd come up with was insane, but insane was all he had. "All right," he said, gathering his crew around the map. "Here's what we're going to do." The plan relied on one simple fact. German tanks couldn't shoot what they couldn't see. The road the Panzers were using ran through a narrow valley about a mile long. At the southern end, where the road emerged from the hills, there was a sharp bend, almost 90 degrees, where the road curved around a massive oak tree that had probably been standing since before the Revolution. If the Panzers came through that bend one at a time, they'd be exposed for about 5 seconds before they could bring their guns to bear on the valley ahead. 5 seconds wasn't much, but it was enough. Mack positioned his 4 Stuarts in a staggered line along the western ridge, hidden behind the hedgerows that crowned the hill. From this position, they could see the bend in the road, but the Panzers coming around the corner couldn't see them. The Germans would be looking straight ahead, expecting trouble from the south. They wouldn't be looking up at the ridge on their right flank. "Danny, you take the first shot. Aim for the tracks. If you can't immobilize him, aim for the engine deck." "The engine deck, Sarge? That's a hell of a shot." "The armor's thinner there. 30 millimeters, maybe less. Your 37 can punch through if you hit it right." Webb looked skeptical, but he nodded. "Pete, you're second. Same drill. First shot at the tracks, second shot at the engine." "What if they turn toward us?" Then you run, back behind the ridge, down the reverse slope, and reposition at the fallback point. Don't try to slug it out. We're not here to die. We're here to slow them down. And you, Sarge? Mac smiled grimly. I'm going to do something stupid. The Panzers appeared at 8:47 a.m. Mac was watching through binoculars from his position on the ridge when the first tank nosed around the distant bend. A Panzer IV Ausführung H, its long 75mm gun probing the morning air like the antenna of some monstrous insect. Behind it, more tanks followed. 2, 3, 5, 7. The column stretched back around the curve and out of sight. At least 12 tanks, maybe more. Mac felt his stomach drop. He'd been hoping the intelligence was wrong, hoping the Germans would send fewer tanks, or different tanks, or no tanks at all. But there they were, grinding down the road in perfect formation, their commanders standing tall in their hatches, scanning the ridgelines for exactly the kind of ambush Mac was planning. "All units, stand by," he said into the radio. "Nobody shoots until I give the word." The lead Panzer reached the bend with the oak tree at 9:03 a.m. The driver slowed to navigate the sharp turn. The commander ducked down to check his map. For 5 seconds, maybe 6, the tank was broadside to the ridge, its right flank completely exposed. "Danny, now!" Webb Stewart fired. The 37mm round crossed the 400 yards between the ridge and the road in less than a second. It struck the Panzer's right track, just behind the drive sprocket, and detonated with a flash of orange fire. The track snapped. The Panzer lurched sideways, its right side digging into the soft earth at the edge of the road. The driver tried to compensate, gunning the engine, but without the track, the tank could only spin in place, blocking the road. "Second shot, hit the engine." Webb fired again. This time the round struck higher, punching through the thin armor of the engine deck and igniting something inside. Black smoke began pouring from the Panzer's rear vents. The crew bailed out, tumbling from their hatches and running for the ditch. 1 Panzer down, 11 to go. The 2nd Panzer in the column tried to push past the burning wreck, but the road was too narrow. The driver pulled hard left, trying to go around through the field, and immediately bogged down in the soft earth, his tracks spinning uselessly in the mud. "Pete, hit the stuck one!" Simmons fired twice. The first round bounced off the Panzer's turret. The angle was wrong. But the second found the same weak spot Webb had exploited, punching through the engine deck and starting another fire. 2 Panzers burning, 10 to go. Now the Germans reacted. The 3rd Panzer in the column opened fire on the ridge, its 75mm gun searching for the source of the ambush. The round exploded 20 yards from Webb's position, showering his tank with dirt and debris. "Danny, move. Get behind the ridge." Webb Stewart lurched backward, disappearing behind the hedgerow just as the Panzer fired again. This round passed through the space where the tank had been a second earlier and exploded harmlessly in the field beyond. But now the Germans knew where the threat was coming from. The column was deploying, tanks fanning out across the available ground, their guns swinging toward the ridge. What had been a single-file column of vulnerable targets was becoming a firing line of 12 guns, all pointed at Mac's position. "Fall back! All units, fall back to the secondary position!" The 4 Stuarts retreated down the reverse slope, their engines screaming as they raced to stay ahead of the German shells. Rounds exploded all around them, some close enough to rattle teeth and loosen fillings. But the ridge provided cover, and the Panzers couldn't depress their guns low enough to hit targets on the reverse slope. Mac's plan had worked. 2 German tanks were burning, and the column was stopped, deployed, trying to figure out what had hit them. But it had only bought them 15 minutes, and Captain Holloway had said they needed to hold for 2 hours. The secondary position was another ridgeline, half a mile south of the first. From here, Mac could see the Germans reorganizing, infantry dismounting from half-tracks, scouts probing forward, tanks maneuvering to find firing positions. They weren't going to fall for the same trick twice. The next attack would be coordinated, professional, deadly. "What do we do now, Sarge?" Mac looked at the map. Between his position and the crossroads at Saint-Côme, there were 3 more ridgelines, 2 sunken roads, and a small stone bridge over a stream that was too deep for tanks to ford. 3 ridgelines, 2 roads, 1 bridge. "We keep falling back," he said. "We hit them every time they think they're safe. We make them deploy, make them waste time, make them afraid of every hedgerow and every hill. And when we run out of ridge lines, then we improvise. The next 4 hours became a masterclass in what military theorists would later call mobile defense and what Mac's crew simply called running like hell. Every time the German column began to advance, one of the Stuarts would appear, on a ridge, behind a hedgerow, at the far end of a sunken road, and fire a few quick rounds before disappearing again. The 37mm shells couldn't kill a Panzer from the front, but they could crack vision blocks, damage external equipment, and rattle crews. And every time a shell struck, the Germans had to stop, deploy, and sweep the area for more threats. It was like fighting a hornet with a hammer. The hammer was deadly, but the hornet kept stinging and flying away. At 10:15 a.m., Corporal Simmons caught a Panzer from the side as it tried to cross an open field. His first shot tracked the tank. His second and third penetrated the thinner side armor and started a fire in the ammunition storage. The Panzer exploded, its turret lifting off the hull and cartwheeling through the air. 3 Panzers down, 9 to go. At 10:47 a.m., Sergeant Jankowski ambushed a pair of Panzers moving through an orchard. The trees blocked the Germans' line of sight, and Jankowski was able to get within 100 yards before opening fire. At that range, even the 37mm could penetrate side armor. He knocked out both tanks before they knew what was happening, one with shots to the engine, one with a lucky round through the turret ring that jammed the gun mechanism. 5 Panzers down, 7 to go. But the Stuarts were taking hits too. At 11:03 a.m., a German shell clipped the turret of Webb's tank, killing his loader and wounding his gunner. Webb managed to limp the tank back to the fallback position, but Daredevil was out of the fight, her turret mechanism damaged, her gun unable to traverse. At 11:28 a.m., Simmons's tank threw a track while racing across a plowed field. The crew bailed out just before a Panzer round turned Pale Rider into a bonfire. 2 Stuarts down, 2 left. Mac and Jankowski fell back to the stone bridge. The bridge was the last defensible position before the crossroads. It was old, probably medieval, built of massive stone blocks that could stop almost anything short of a direct hit. The stream it crossed was too deep to ford and too wide to jump. If the Germans wanted to reach Saint-Côme, they had to cross this bridge. "We hold here," Mac said. "No more falling back." "Sarge, there's only 2 of us left." "I know, but look at the ground." The approach to the bridge was a narrow lane between 2 flooded fields. A tank couldn't leave the road without bogging down, and the bridge itself was only wide enough for 1 vehicle at a time. "They have to come at us single file, 1 at a time, just like the first ambush. And when they get across?" Mac didn't answer. They both knew the answer. When the Germans got across, the 2 remaining Stuarts would die, and the Panzers would roll onto the crossroads. But that was 90 minutes from now, maybe 2 hours, if they were lucky. Captain Holloway had asked for 2 hours. The Germans arrived at the bridge at 11:52 a.m. There were 7 tanks left, 5 Panzer IVs, and 2 Stuggy 3 assault guns that had been hanging back during the earlier fighting. They'd learned from the morning's disasters. Instead of rushing forward, they stopped at the edge of the lane and began probing with infantry. German soldiers crept forward through the hedgerows, looking for the hidden tanks they knew were waiting. But Mac had positioned his 2 Stuarts behind the stone walls of an old farmhouse, on the far side of the bridge, invisible from the German side of the stream. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. The Germans probed. Mac waited. At 12:14 p.m., the lead Panzer began to move. The driver inched forward onto the bridge, his commander scanning the far bank through binoculars. The bridge was only 40 yards long, a few seconds crossing at normal speed, but the Panzer crept across at walking pace, expecting an ambush at any moment. Mac let him come. The Panzer reached the midpoint of the bridge. Its gun was pointed straight ahead, toward the road beyond the farmhouse. Its commander was looking left, toward the hedgerow, where he expected the Stuarts to be hiding. He wasn't looking right, toward the farmhouse. Now, Mac's gunner fired. The 37mm round struck the Panzer's right track at a range of 60 yards. The track shattered. The tank slewed sideways, its left track still driving forward, and slammed into the stone railing of the bridge with a crash that echoed across the valley. The Panzer was stuck, wedged diagonally across the bridge, blocking it completely. Its gun was pointed at the sky, useless. Its crew was scrambling to bail out before the next round hit, but Mack wasn't aiming at the crew. "Hit the tank behind him!" The second Panzer was still on the German side of the bridge, only 20 yards behind the first. When the lead tank blocked the bridge, the second driver had stopped, waiting for the road to clear. He was still waiting when Yankowski's round punched through his side armor and detonated inside his engine compartment. 6 Panzers down, 6 to go. And the bridge was blocked. The Germans spent 45 minutes trying to clear the bridge. They couldn't push the disabled Panzer out of the way. It was wedged too tightly against the stone railings. They couldn't go around. The flooded fields on either side would swallow a tank whole. They tried sending infantry across to assault the farmhouse, but Mack's bow gunners cut them down with machine gun fire before they reached the far bank. At 1:03 p.m., a German officer, probably frustrated beyond reason, ordered one of the Stuggy 3s to try to push the wrecked Panzer off the bridge by brute force. It was the last mistake he would make. The Stug rolled onto the bridge and began pushing against the Panzer's hull. The wrecked tank shifted, an inch, then another, then a foot. For a moment, it looked like the plan might work. Then Mack fired. His shot struck the Stuggy's exposed side armor. The assault gun had turned slightly to push against the wreck, presenting its flank to the farmhouse. The 37mm round punched through and detonated inside the fighting compartment. The Stug lurched, slewed sideways, and crashed into the other railing of the bridge. Now, there were 2 wrecked vehicles blocking the crossing, one at each rail, with barely enough room between them for a man to squeeze through. 7 Panzers down, 5 to go. And the bridge was completely impassable. The German commander, whoever he was, must have realized he'd been outmaneuvered. His tanks couldn't cross the bridge. His infantry couldn't take the farmhouse without armor support. And somewhere to the south, he knew American reinforcements were coming. He tried one last gambit. At 1:05 p.m., the 5 remaining Panzers began to withdraw, pulling back up the road they'd come from. But it wasn't a retreat, it was a flanking maneuver. The Germans were going to find another crossing, somewhere upstream or downstream, and try to reach Saint-Côme from a different direction. "Sarge, they're running." "No, they're not. They're going around, and we can't let them." Mack grabbed the radio. "Jersey Devil, this is Lucky Lou. The Panzers are withdrawing north. We need to pursue and harass. Keep them from finding another crossing. Lou, we're almost out of ammunition. I've got maybe 10 rounds left." "I've got 15. It'll have to be enough." The 2 Stuarts emerged from behind the farmhouse and raced across the bridge, squeezing between the 2 wrecked tanks with inches to spare, and accelerated up the road after the retreating Panzers. For the next 12 minutes, the chase continued through the Norman countryside. The Stuarts would catch sight of the German column, fire a few rounds to keep them moving, then fall back before the Panzers could turn and engage. It was harassment, pure and simple. Mosquitoes bothering elephants. But it kept the Germans from stopping to regroup, kept them moving north, away from the crossroads they needed to reach. At 1:17 p.m., Mack heard the most beautiful sound he'd ever experienced, the roar of American tank destroyers coming up the road from Saint-Côme. 4 M10 Wolverines, with their 3-inch guns that could actually kill a Panzer from the front, crested the ridge behind the farmhouse and opened fire on the German column. The remaining Panzers, caught in the open with no room to maneuver, didn't stand a chance. The lead M10 put a round through the engine deck of the nearest Panzer, setting it ablaze. The second M10 hit another Panzer in the turret, the impact so powerful that the tank's commander was thrown clear of the hatch like a rag doll. The third and fourth M10s engaged the remaining 3 tanks, and within seconds all of them were burning. Within 10 minutes, all 5 remaining German tanks were destroyed. The battle was over. The column that had threatened to push the American beachhead back into the sea was now a string of burning wrecks scattered across a mile of Norman road. 12 tanks, maybe more counting the ones destroyed earlier, had been stopped by 4 light tanks that weren't supposed to be able to hurt them. Max sat in his turret hatch and watched the smoke rise from the burning Panzers. His hands were shaking, his throat was dry. He'd been in combat for nearly 5 hours, and his body was only now starting to realize what it had been through. Behind him, he heard Rossetti's voice from the driver's compartment. "Sarge, we really did it, didn't we?" "Yeah, Tony, we really did." Captain Holloway arrived at the bridge at 2:30 p.m., riding in the back of a jeep that had to detour around the wrecked Stoogie still blocking the crossing. He climbed out and walked to where Mac was sitting on the stone wall of the farmhouse, drinking water from his canteen. The sergeant's face was black with smoke and grime. His hands were still shaking from 5 hours of combat. Holloway looked at the burning tanks, 7 of them destroyed by 2 stewards that shouldn't have been able to scratch their paint. "I told you to buy me 2 hours," he said. "Yes, sir." "You gave me 5. "Yes, sir." Holloway shook his head slowly. "When I gave you this mission, I thought I was sending you to die. I thought you'd slow them down for maybe 30 minutes before they rolled right over you." "We thought so too, sir." "What changed?" Mac looked at the bridge, at the wrecked Panzer still wedged against the railing, at the column of smoke rising from the valley beyond. "We stopped thinking like tankers, sir. We started thinking like hunters. The Stuarts couldn't beat the Panzers in a fair fight, so we made sure it wasn't fair." He took another sip of water. "Speed instead of armor, ambush instead of assault, hit and run instead of stand and fight. The Stuart's not a battle tank, Captain. It's a knife, and a knife can kill a man twice your size, if you know where to stick it." The story of the Stuart platoon at Saint-Côme spread through the 75th Tank Battalion within days. Within weeks, it had reached the armored school at Fort Knox, where instructors began teaching the Makiewicz method to new tank commanders. The method was simple. Stop trying to fight the way the enemy expects. Use speed to create ambushes. Use terrain to negate armor advantages. Never attack from where you're expected. Never be where the enemy's gun is pointing. It wasn't revolutionary. Good cavalry officers had been doing the same thing since Genghis Khan, but it was revolutionary for the American armored force, which had been trying to fight German tanks with doctrine designed for a different war. The Army's official after-action report analyzed the engagement in detail. 7 German tanks destroyed by light tank fire, 3 Panzer IVs, 2 more Panzer IVs disabled and later finished by tank destroyers, and 2 Stoogie 3s. 5 more Panzer IVs destroyed by the M10S after they arrived. A complete German armored column wiped out. The report noted that the Stuart platoon had fired 127 rounds of 37mm ammunition during the engagement. Of those, 43 had hit their targets. Of the hits, only 17 had actually penetrated armor. But those 17 penetrating hits had destroyed or disabled 7 tanks, a kill ratio that rivaled the best Sherman crews in the theater. The key, the report concluded, was target selection. Every penetrating hit had been against a weak point. Engine decks, ammunition storage, track assemblies, vision blocks. The Stuart crews hadn't tried to fight the Panzers on German terms. They'd found the vulnerabilities and exploited them ruthlessly. Eugene Makiewicz received the Silver Star for his actions at Saint-Côme. The citation read, "For gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States, on the 14th of June 1944, in the vicinity of Saint-Côme-du-Mont, France, Sergeant Makiewicz, commanding a platoon of M5A1 light tanks, engaged a superior enemy armored force and through skillful use of terrain, tactical judgment, and personal courage, destroyed 7 enemy tanks while delaying the enemy advance for over 5 hours. Sergeant Makiewicz's actions directly contributed to the successful defense of a critical crossroads and reflected great credit upon himself and the armed forces of the United States." Danny Webb received the Bronze Star for destroying 2 Panzers despite having a crew member killed and another wounded. He finished the war commanding his own platoon, and he carried a piece of shrapnel from Daredevil's turret in his left shoulder for the rest of his life. Pete Simmons and his crew all received Purple Hearts for their injuries when Pale Rider was destroyed. Simmons himself had second-degree burns on his hands and face from the fire, but he returned to duty within a month and finished the war commanding a Sherman. Bill Jankowski received a battlefield promotion to staff sergeant and a Silver Star of his own for his actions at the Orchard, where he destroyed 2 Panzers at point-blank range. He later said it was the most terrifying experience of his life, watching those massive German guns swing toward him, knowing that one hit would be the end, firing as fast as Jimmy could load, and praying his shells would find the weak spots before the German shells found him. Lucky Lou survived the war. She was eventually shipped back to the States and used as a training vehicle at Fort Benning until 1948, when she was finally scrapped. Before the cutting torches did their work, a sergeant at the motor pool photographed the kill markings on her turret, 7 small crosses, painted in white, each one representing a Panzer that should have killed her. He also photographed the crew's names, painted in smaller letters below the tank's name: Makiewicz, Rossetti, Washington, Chen. 4 men who'd done the impossible in a tank that everyone said couldn't do anything at all. 7 tanks destroyed by a light tank that everyone said couldn't kill anything. The Stuart remained in service through the end of the war, but its role changed after Normandy. Commanders stopped using it as a failed medium tank and started using it the way Makiewicz had, as a scout, a raider, a weapon of speed and surprise. The losses dropped, the kills increased. All because one sergeant on one morning decided that the tank everyone mocked might be exactly the right weapon for the job, if you used it the right way. Eugene Makiewicz finished the war as a first sergeant. He could have applied for a commission. His commanders would have supported it, but he preferred to stay with his men. He said the officers had to worry about doctrine and politics. All he wanted to worry about was keeping his crew alive. He returned to Chicago in 1946 and took over his father's hardware store. He married his high school sweetheart, had 3 kids, and lived a quiet life in the neighborhood where he'd grown up. He never talked much about the war. When his children asked about his medals, he'd just say he'd been lucky. When they asked about the tanks, he'd say they were good machines that deserved better than the doctrine they'd been given. He never mentioned the 7 Panzers, never mentioned the bridge at Saint-Côme, never mentioned the 5 hours when he and 3 other Stuarts held off an entire German armored column. Some things you don't brag about, you just remember them. Eugene Makiewicz died in 1991 at the age of 71. His obituary mentioned his hardware store, his family, his service in World War II. It didn't mention what he'd done with a tank that everyone said couldn't fight. But the men who'd been at Saint-Côme remembered, and in 1994, the 3 surviving members of his platoon, all in their 70s now, gray and stooped and walking with canes, gathered at the American cemetery in Normandy for the 50th anniversary of D-Day. They stood at the graves of the men they'd lost. They talked about the tanks they'd crewed, and they raised a toast to the little Stuart that everyone had mocked. The tank that couldn't kill anything, until it killed everything. If you want to see more stories like this, check out one of these videos here. We'll see you next time.